Then there are various I should say variations in micro teaching. These variations can be categorized into two categories. They are general variations and they are specific variations. The micro teaching can be a general teaching skilled program which is very specific. It is a subject specific program. And then when you talk about developing skills, it is a very general teaching skilled program. So, you have to develop the skill and at the same time you have to gain knowledge of the subject. Micro teaching or maybe a teaching in a class requires various skills, and the foremost or the most important skill which is needed is task. Now, it is a task which has to be done in a set framework. There is a certain format and you have to accomplish that task, or something needs to be done within the format of micro teaching. Another important aspect is skill. It has to be a technique, or you have to develop a technique which is descriptive, which is modeled and which can be learned. So, you can say you have to develop a skill which is in the form of a technique which can be described, which can be modeled and at the same time which can be learned. And then you have to frame a certain strategy. Now, strategy means it is something how the teacher, the teacher has to develop a strategy, how the teacher tackles certain themes in the language teaching. There are certain recurring problems, recurring themes, recurring targets which the teacher needs to address from time to time. So, you can have a strategy, how do you deal with these kind of themes. Now, I would rather title it as the briefing of what we have been talking about is the technique or the skill could be in the form of an oral discussion, or it could be in the form of a written instructions gathered together. So, it can be a set of written instructions prior to teaching, or it could be in the form of oral discussion, and in a very layman language I would rather say it could be something to give you a basic background of what you are going to learn or what is going to be taught in a class. Another source of preparation can be modeled, and this modeling can be done in the form of tape models or in the form of transcript models. There can be tape models and there can be transcript models. Advantage of modeling is it gives the trainees, especially the inexperienced students, a sample. You are giving them a sample of what teaching might look like in a given situation. See, I am teaching, I have been teaching for the past 20 years, but how do you evolve as a teacher? So, basically it is like giving a sample, giving a model to a learner, and then the learner would choose what kind of a sample approves or suits his or her situation, and then what kind of evolvement he needs or wants to achieve as a teacher. But there is at the same time there is a disadvantage, and what is that disadvantage? Because when you model certain things, what happens is the modeling might encourage the students to think that what is being modeled is the only correct or the right manner of doing a particular thing. We just do not want to give them a model or give them a set framework or give them a set image of what a teacher and the delivering of a lecture should be like. What we want is they should be able to evolve, they should have their own space, they should have that scope to evolve as a teacher. So, we cannot. So, this is the major disadvantage when we talk about modeling. See, what happens is nowadays our children are more and more exposed to television, to media, to social networking sites, etc., etc. In older times, if you ask the student, if it is a group of maybe a set of students to draw what you call a devil look likes, or what say if you draw an image from the Indian mythology, say a Ravan look likes, each student will give you a different drawing, which means each and every individual have their own interpretation, their own imagination of the image of Ravan. But now in modern times, when they are exposed to television, when they are exposed to media, if you ask them to draw, they will give you the image of the Ravan which they have been seeing or watching in those television serials. So, what happens? This is the disadvantage. The creativity is being curbed. So, we need to model, we need to provide them with models, but then there has to be a space for development, space for creativity, space for advancement and evolvement. Now, to talk about a micro teaching lesson, or so to call a micro lesson. Now, these micro lessons, they can be prepared at 3 different levels. The 3 different levels, to specify, at the individual level, wherein the teacher works on the individual student, which involves a major portion of this involves attaining of knowledge, grasping of knowledge, which is like the collection of data. It also works at the paired level, and then it can be a group activity. So, unit planning involves working at the individual level, working in pairs, and then it can also be a group activity. Thus, the interactive stage of micro teaching, the trainee puts into practice what he or she has planned. Then what happens? 5 to 10 minutes of teaching takes place, and the student makes notes of the points that may create reflective discussion. So, they get an opportunity as to what they want to discuss. They take down notes and then they come up with their own interpretation of things. Now, what happens is, another important feature which we can talk about here is there is a lot of peer teaching, because a particular student, when teaches, he is teaching his peers. The other trainees are also participating, and their role is more of a student rather than of a teacher. So, when these trainees take part in the attire of a student, they give you better feedbacks. The target teacher gets lots of feedbacks for improvement, and then you go to meet the real student. So, this is how the peer teaching is an important experience in this aspect, and it holds much importance, very much importance, I would say vital and great importance when it comes to teaching language, because there is lot of interaction, there is lot of exchange of language, and everybody has, see, language is, there is nothing static about language, it is a continuously evolving process. So, how do you use a particular noun, how do you use a particular verb, originates from the mind of the student. So, the more you interact, there are more new things coming up. And then what happens at the same time is, now comes the use of IT. You can record the teaching, there could be high tech, there could be low tech, without the hardware. But then what happens is, once you see what you have been doing, there are times when we contemplate on what we did, and then we think, oh, I could have been better. So, now it gives you an opportunity how to improve yourself, which is very important. Everybody wants to improve, there is a space for improvement, but when you use this technology, it gives you lot of space and lot of time, lot of energy to contemplate and improve yourself. So, you evolve out ways of improvement. Now, at the same time, analysis and discussion also takes place. After the recording, after this thing, there is a lot of analysis and there is lot of discussion which takes place. What happens is, it requires very careful handling on the part of the supervisor. The supervisor has to be very careful while handling the students, because you're trying to criticize, at the same time you're trying to let the student, let the teacher be creative. You don't want to criticize and demoralize them. So, you want them to be creative and at the same time criticize them. So, therefore, a very careful handling is needed on the part of the supervisor. The teacher of the micro lesson should usually be given the first opportunity to comment on the lesson. You need to stop the tape from time to time and then ask them for feedbacks. So, what happens is you give them opportunity, you can, like with the use of IT, you can cut them, you can redo them, you can improve them. There are a lot of chances, and then you can use them in a skill specific manner. So, thus, so if the skill in the trainee is not mastered in the first attempt, it gives you an opportunity to master it again and again. You can make lot of attempts and competence is achieved. So, it helps you in achieving competence. But what is important here, now this reteach cycle should be attempted immediately after analysis and criticizing is being done, because the things are fresh in the mind, the things are still there in the mind. So, if you do it immediately, it helps you in better evolution, it helps you in better correction of your performance. Now, micro teaching and assessment is another important aspect. What happens is, now we need to assess our students, but particularly when we talk about micro teaching, the practical aspect or the practical work should be given more weightage rather than the written examinations, because again I come to the point which I have been underlining ever since the beginning of this session, that we do not want our students to go in for rote learning. We want them to depart from bookish knowledge. We want them to use more practical knowledge. They should be skilled in the practical use of the knowledge. So, therefore, our assessment should be based more on the practical work and less on the written examination. So, therefore, we say that it uses assessment in a very indirect manner, which is like teach and learn. What you are doing is you are learning and teaching at the same time. It takes place in two forms. You are teaching and you are learning at the same time. There are micro lessons, there are mini lessons, and there are longer lessons. So, there are certain benefits of micro teaching, and first is, what happens in micro teaching? The supervision is focused and it is selective, because micro teaching evolves through the experience, the individual experience of the teacher itself. So, therefore, it is focused, it is selective, it helps you into evolving your own mechanism. Thus, I would say the supervisor limits his comments to one area of concern rather than bombarding the intern with a full scale criticism of all his weaknesses. You can supervise him, you can target the particular area, you can help him evolve in a particular area. So, the target has to be confined, it has to be focused, it has to be selective. And by focusing in this manner, you increase the chance of the intern improving and acting as per the suggestions, and it does not destroy the motivation of the intern or the learner. So, what we do is we need to be focused, we need to be selective, and at the same time we need to give them space for creativity without harming the intern's motivation. We need to retain the motivation of the student. We need to want our student to act according to the guidance, but at the same time his creativity needs to be retained, which is a very, very important aspect. So, thus by focusing we increase the chance of the intern improving and acting as per the suggestions, and it does not destroy the intern's motivation.